months ago, numerous delays because the state auditor was involved in the homeless audit, so it had some delays, but it was all good because the results of the audit, and I'll get into the highlights in a moment, were very revealing and telling. And just as Wendy just said, it is a roadmap, but probably the largest takeaway from me, the top line from the audit, is what it did not address. And the reality and the realization of why it didn't address certain things based on the questions and the parameters and the framework that we had provided. But because the inherent complexity of how DHCS, Department of Healthcare Services, DSS, the Department of Social Services, and then there's this little, I don't know what to call it, the big box over on additionally is sober living homes, which are not even addressed. And I'll get into the reasons why. So the illuminating factor is this is the beginning of our endeavor to determine why people are not recovering in these facilities. And not all these facilities are licensed by the state of California. So we are peeling back this onion to realize how much is not addressed under state regulation. And I have said this publicly, and I've said this to the auditors. I'll say it to you folks. I personally am not a fan of regulation in many forms of business or public life, but this is an area that is desperately in need of state or local regulation and responsibility and accountability and transparency. And that is what this audit truly reveals, is the lack of oversight by any public body. So let me just jump right into it. Some of you may have read about it. The Register always does an amazing job in covering this. And so you may have known just the parameters, but I'll go right through it. So it did take a while. They didn't, the audit results were announced in October 24th. So we had our briefing and our debriefing, and we had a media event right there at the county administration office, and highlighted essentially what we're going to be telling you. And I'm very pleased that this was my bill to sponsor the audit. The genesis was out of your group, but it was co-authored by many Orange County legislators. So it's bipartisan, bicameral, also in the Senate. So, and you're sitting in the county conference room, and Supervisor Foley has been instrumental too, and she's an important voice. So everyone has a voice here as we tell the story and what needs to be done. All right, the bottom line question, as we're all saying, are the residents in these facilities getting well? And the reason we don't know, and the reason why this question was included in the original audit list of questions, why there are no findings on the rehabilitation aspect, is because no one's maintaining that data. So point number one, we have to start creating a process, and that's to come as we go forward in many of the action steps necessary. But we need to have data, we need to track rehabilitation and recovery in these facilities. So the audit does not address recovery. It also does not address, this was a fundamental aha for me, is sober living homes. And that is really part of the problem in our local communities, because these sober living homes are not regulated. They are not licensed by the state of California, and they're not licensed by our local government. They are just group homes. And the idea of the group homes 40 years ago, although the law has not changed in 40 years, I did not know that either, so it's time for a change, was to, as we all know, is to deinstitutionalize people who are in recovery or in need of rehabilitation and on their addictions, and to create an opportunity to recover in a family-like setting in a neighborhood. Well, we all know that that's not happening, and it really is becoming a major talking point that the intent of the original law of 1984, I think it was to deinstitutionalize and create a family-like setting. So I don't know about you, and I've sent this to the auditors, I don't know how many communities the residents in these sober living homes or even in the licensed homes are participating in neighborhood group activities and Memorial Day parades or 4th of July parades. This is not happening. So this is an area, again, for further exploration, is that the concept may have had merit 40 years ago, but it's not happening in the reality world of people who are in these homes. The next point I'll make is a major finding that was new to us, and I applaud the auditors, is what has happened in many of our communities, including many of yours, all of ours, is because of the web of ownership and property and LLCs and legal entities that in your mind's eye envision a spider web organization chart. So there's a corporate entity, a legal entity that owns and licenses these healthcare facilities, rehabilitative facilities under each Department of Healthcare Services. But they are, in many communities, they are these individual homes, residential homes, single family residential homes that have been converted for this use. They are being grouped together in a de facto institutional setting because you have a number of homes that are in adjacencies in a neighborhood owned by the same owner of the chain of command, and they are essentially the same type of cottage type facilities that are institutions. So the intent of the original law is being thwarted by the de facto concentration of these single family residences that constitute institutionalization. So this was, as I said, an aha moment, and we're going to be addressing this. All of us will be working as we get into the end of this discussion, working in certain areas where we can translate this into law. The compelling reason for us, as always has been, as Wendy said, is getting people well. And the reason we have not been no one's been able to get their arms around it is because we've never understood why people are not getting well, but no one's tracking it, and these patients are not being well treated. Another way that patients are not being well treated in these quasi-institutional de facto homes is that the operators have figured out, because the state of California requires licensing for 6 beds and fewer. So the operators know, by what we have realized now with the data and the findings of this audit, the Department of Healthcare Services does not adequately review the process of permitting and licensing, as well as qualifying the licensing and following up on the license or complaints. And so there's very little regulation. Once they get a license, unless there's a complaint, then it may take years. There are examples that the auditors found of over 500 days before the complaint was addressed. So the operators, and I would say they're good operators, as we all know. The bad operators have proliferated in our communities and in the state. The bad operators desire to have a state licensed facility, 6 beds and under, so they are aggregating the 6 beds and under together and essentially having these multiple units and institutionalizing, but they're all licensed with very little oversight by the state of California. So they have figured out a way around it, because most cities, and Newport Beach is one city that has a very strong permit requirement for 7 beds and over, 6 beds and more. And the operators don't want to go with the local government for 7 beds and more because they'll be under the tighter regulation and oversight of local government. So getting licensed by the state of California, one could think, oh, they're licensed, that means that they are operating at a higher standard. That too has been determined that these operators are not operating or providing the level of service, rehabilitative services, that are needed to adequately take care of these patients. We have learned through our conversations outside of the audit that well-run operators, and there are well-run operators in our own communities. Directions for Women is a case in point, and the president of the organization spoke at our news conference, and she's called our attention to the fact that there are standards that good operations follow that are national standards of service provide for rehabilitation services, that the state of California is like 2 iterations behind the times in strengthening these regulations for rehabilitative care. So a lot to follow up on there. So the overconcentration of groupings goes directly against the original law in 1984. And so that is an easy place where we are going to start to require that through legal entities and through distancing requirements and separate management. And these types of homes do not coexist and we don't even have to use the word neighborhood, just do not coexist in proximity to one another, wherever they are. They're not providing that kind of service. Just some examples, and I encourage everybody to read it. I think you'll find that there's a link that you can access the report. The DHCS found some troubling data. Renewal compliance inspections for an operator who wanted to renew their license had an average delay of 207 days, which means that this operator can be operating without a license for almost over a year. Beyond, and the department has its own best practices, which they do not adhere to. The department's requirement is a deadline of responding to a license renewal within 90 days. Well, the average is over 200 days. When investigating complaints, DHCS is required to assign an investigator in 10 days. But the audit found that it takes them an average of 183 days. So here it is in black and white. The department it's not adequately staffed, resourced to do what it needs to do. While DHCS internal guidelines are for 30 to 60 days for investigations, for the length of time for an investigation, the audit found an average it takes them 1 year for low to medium priority complaints and just under 3 months for high priority complaints. These priority classifications are not necessarily always clearly defined. I asked to get a better understanding what's the difference between low, medium priority, or high priority. They're all important and they should all be addressed. DHCS doesn't always conduct site visits nor follow-up on violations happening at unlicensed facilities to confirm the unlawful practice has ceased. So they, by the auditor's admission, the auditors are objective, so that they're not taking sides on this, they're just speaking the facts, that DHCS is not adhering to state law. And so as we say, this is just, I've said publicly, and I think we all have realized, this is good, this is a good baseline, this is the beginning. Alcohol and drug treatment facilities have long lacked transparency and data, and the data is which determines the success of the outcomes. So we don't know. We have to have a framework for establishing the right criteria. The audit opens the door to the data requirement that we need data that tells us the current licensing structure is not adequate to provide the necessary rehabilitative treatments patients require. I think my own personal opinion is license is just a license to turn on the lights. The license is, do they have the right fire suppression sprinklers? Do they have electricity? Do they maintain a clean facility? It's the basics. It's not even about rehabilitation. And even though these facilities, the DHCS, I don't think I have it in front of me, that there are 6 key areas that they monitor. One is detoxification, and that's really a misnomer. How can someone go into these facilities to be detoxed? What's the word? To be detoxed? And there's no medical personnel, there's no licensed personnel, and the people who are trained professionals are really the minimum level of any kind of professional training. So this whole area at DHCS is ripe for change and improvement. And this is why all of us sitting and listening to this in your room, conference room, how frustrated we've all been at the city level trying to go and residents going after data. We complain and we don't hear. Well, now we know why. It's really a problem that needs to be fixed. We obviously need to address these shortcomings and continually only ask, are people getting well? If people are getting well, these will be in facilities that are well run, they're not aggregated as quasi institutions, and they're addressing the medical and physical needs of these patients. And I believe by specifying as we go forward the requirements of rehabilitation, and I'm not a medical practitioner, so we will get the correct definition of the right level of professionals and their experience. People will be, and the good operators, like the Directions for Women, they monitor, they record, they have a patient sheet on everybody's progress, and then when they're detoxed, they're ready to be released, they're prescribed to go to the next step. None of this is happening in state licensed facilities, so it's really shameful. So what I'm doing right now with my staff, and Kristen is there, and Janelle I think is there, and my Sacramento staff, working on my legislative package. So here we are in November. By January or December, we will have put together and working with other of my Orange County colleagues. So I won't be the only one introducing legislation. We will divide up these critical areas. And we have the credibility of this audit. I will also purposely have another bill to go after, have an audit of DSNS, Department of Social Services. That's where the medical treatment is housed under their purview. And then we have to wrestle with sober living homes because there's no licensing. And if you ever hear the word that they're certified, that is less than licensing. So this whole area requires our thoughtful, careful analysis of how we address this. It's a great opportunity. It has not been addressed in 40 years. We've been kind of doing whack-a-mole and swatting at clouds for all these years of thinking that this public agency is going to be responsive. And there is slightly, I'll give a mild defense of Department of Healthcare Services. The law does not prescribe them to do anything else. And in 40 years ago, the addiction, drug and alcohol addiction situation coupled with the homeless situation was non-existent. And then of course the institutions closed, it was pushed down, the care was pushed down to the counties and the money hasn't been there. So this really, sadly, this issue has not been helping people recover from their addictions, has not been adequately addressed by the state of California in 40 years. So we have to be careful how we say all this, but we will say it in a thoughtful, caring, data-driven way that we can fix this problem and be proud of what we can do to help people recover. So we're working with, my staff will be working with all of you, and we're all, it's a combined effort, a group effort, and we will continue. These meetings are helpful to share the ideas and to react, for all of you to react to the data or to the auditor's report. At the very minimum, DHCS has to improve on the timeliness of their complaint investigations and more thoroughly investigate unlicensed facilities. And they're not even charged to investigate unlicensed facilities. And of course, we all know local government's hands are tied, so that's going to be an important area for local governments to be given that authority. Just like the Department of Motor Vehicles, the state of California allows local law enforcement to issue speeding tickets. Why can't local governments, through their enforcement mechanisms, help people recover from their addictions? So I think the bottom line is not enough accountability and transparency in the treatment and recovery space. We're here going forward, I'm here anyway, to help people get well and to help our communities thrive. So I want to thank you for hanging in here and working all together and realizing the challenges that we still have. Each of these bills that we're talking about, as they get defined, they're not defined yet, but to address these issues that we've talked about here today, there's no guarantee, but if we approach this in a scientific, data-driven way, and it's going to take a few years because it'll take a year to get the DSNS audit, but we'll start building on what we know. We'll go one piece at a time, and over time we will find a solution. Local government is a priority, and strengthening the licensing requirements is another priority. So I wish I could be there with you. I'm actually in New York. My grandson has his 10th birthday, so I promised my daughter and my grandson that I would come for his birthday, so here I am. But I have Kristen there and Janelle, and maybe Cooper's there. You all know Cooper too. So feel free to always reach out to my staff, reach out to me directly. And I want to thank all of you. It was Lori Duran there. I want to help her.
Yes.
She's opened our eyes in multiple areas.
Yes.
And Terry Storza from the Register, I don't know if she attends these meetings or listens to them. Her voice is absolutely critical. And she continues to follow, she's analyzed the audit as well. So we're all addressing this in a very professional, respectful way with the goal that people can recover in a professional way, in a life-changing way by the state of California if you're a patient in one of its facilities. So I have to sign off. So I want to thank you for your time, Wendy. Thank you for your time and letting me speak today. And I know Kristen will be able to answer any of your questions.
Thank
So
you. Thank
this
you,
is the
Diane.
beginning. We're on our way.
Thank you, Diane. We appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, have a good meeting, and I'll be briefed on Monday.
Okay, thank you. Enjoy yourself.
All right, take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Okay, well, thank you. And I understand Terry Sforza with the Orange County Register is online. So thank you, Terry, for joining us and staying on top of this. We really appreciate it. Okay.
Can I make one comment on the audit that I,
Sure.
just, it's a glare, you know, I've rolled in this data for years. One of the things that absolutely shocked me, there's a clump, they mentioned the 2 clumpings of 3 homes. There's a clumping in Malibu of 13 homes and cul-de-sacs that were completely ignored. And then there's the Betty Ford out in Palm Springs, where they've taken over blocks of homes. I mean, talk about institutionalized, and, you know, they're held up as a model, you know, model citizen. I'm not arguing that they don't provide good service, but if we're looking for a concentration, that's taking concentration on steroids. So, you know, I don't understand. DHCS doesn't track that data, so I understand why the audit wouldn't pick it up. But they do track the homes in Malibu, and it was just ignored or dismissed or whatever. But, you know, it's blatant in Malibu.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
One more comment about the
Yes.
audit?
Before you speak, could I just ask for the people on Zoom and for the people that don't have placards at the table, that you announce your name so people understand who's
Okay.
making what comments?
Thank you, Warren. Would you just,
Like
Sorry to interrupt.
Warren Hanselman, I do that with a loud voice, so.
and your
With
affiliate?
Advocates for Responsible Treatment.
Thank you, Warren.
Lori
Thank you.
Duran with Advocates for Responsible Treatment. The audit pinned a lot of the blame on the pandemic. This was bad before the pandemic.
Yes.
It's astonishing that they just kept repeating that, oh, it was the pandemic that made things bad at DHCS. It's been going on a lot longer than that.
It's convenient.
That's
Yeah.
a good observation, thank you. So, just to recap, what I heard from our Assemblywoman Dixon is that the focus, she believes, is going to be local government is gonna be a priority to assist, to provide resources or the ability for local government to do something from a legislative standpoint.
She's actually evaluating all
Okay.
of it, but I mean, I think the kind of few bullets that I think she put there in the middle is, yeah, the bottom line, the inspections of the treatment facilities take too long, the investigations don't always even happen, and there's infrequent follow-up after wrongdoing is found. That, you know, in and of itself,
Yeah.
let alone this additional finding of course, these mini concentrations and sort of mini institutions is certainly alarming.
Yes.
She is talking to all of her colleagues, she's talking to stakeholders like Lori, like ACCOC here and its members, like the League, and Legislative Council now to sort of figure out what's going to be the first step, next step for her office to come at it, but also then for what some of her colleagues on both sides of the aisle and in the Senate are going to sort of chip away at. Absolutely local control and giving them the opportunity to get involved in the oversight is certainly a hallmark of everything the Assembly member believes in, and especially in this space. So that will be part of it too, but she can't commit yet on exactly what her legislative piece is
Understood.
gonna be.
Understood. And I appreciate that, and I know there's a lot of things floating out there, and so we'll just stay briefed on that when we continue our gathering each time. And it's good that everybody's around the table and they can present that information. Our role is to provide the support from a testimony standpoint, background standpoint, data standpoint. The goal of this task force is to provide potential solutions that can be, and it's very similar to what ACC's model has been, and that is to provide, policies, procedures that are consistent, that can be used as resources by all of the local jurisdictions. So that's our role here to do that. So we have been very busy doing video, testimony, those are all going to be available, and then when a testimony is needed in Sacramento, that is gonna be a key part of what this task force will do, which is why it's been so phenomenal to have not only representatives that make this, lawmakers, local council folks, county, et cetera, but to also have the residents that are in the neighborhoods that are impacted and can give real life stories. It's been very, very helpful. So let me just give a brief update on the status of the management of the Sober Living Task Force. So as you know, the task force was originally started and funded by City of Mission Viejo. So to broaden its reach, which we realized was happening very fast, and our impact, we've been working for the past few months to transfer the management to ACCOC and ask other entities to join in the cost sharing. That has been moving along. The City of Mission Viejo City Attorney worked with ACCOC to prepare all of the nonprofit filings and the drafting the governing documents, et cetera, and those have been submitted to the state, and our city has funded the filing fee of approximately $1,000 to get all of that handled, so that we're handing something over to ACC and that team that is workable, and also is a whole separate reporting system. So, Chris, do you want to add anything to that? And as far as your participation, and
we're just gonna work with setting up, we'll work with that through that transition. And ACCOC's role will be an administrative one,
Right.
assisting with the financial oversight, collection, invoicing, taxes, auditing, all of those
Right.
things on an annual basis, assisting with invoicing communities, and then we'll work with Jeff and his team on reporting out and creating an entire structure for membership so that it's very well defined. And that'll all come back, I would hope, by early next year. for
yeah,
the task
we're
force to
it's
review.
very close.
Right.
City attorneys are very busy, so unfortunately. Okay, next up, we have I'd like to invite our Newport Beach City Council member, Lauren Kleiman, to provide a readout of the group from our recent legislative ad hoc committee meeting, which she has now become the chair, which I am so happy, because I want to spread the joy and wealth and leadership among great leaders. So, if you could please give us a kind of a readout of what happened.
You're such a giver, Wendy.
Could you tell on the call? I was like, oh, please, thank you for taking over. Yes, you will take over.
Okay, before I get into that, I just wanted to add on the audit. Newport Beach has requested the underlying audit data, and actually the auditor's office called me, and I was sort of in shock, because when you do a PRA request, no one ever, it's like you have to chase, and he called me the next morning, and then actually called me that same afternoon to follow up to say, did you get my voicemail? I have questions about you, I just want to clarify, what exactly are you asking for? So hopefully we can get some of that underlying data that was referenced in the audit, for whatever that's worth, Medi-Cal report, the list of homes that they talked about, the 26 facilities, all of those reports and stuff. So assuming that I eventually get that, of course we'll share it here. Shifting gears to our meeting, the Legislative Ad Hoc Committee convened last week to strategize on best approaches on the heels of the JLAC audit. In attendance was, of course, Chair Bucknam, Kristen Blondie from Assemblymember Diane Dixon's office, Kim Carr from Senator Blake Spears' office, Chris Murray, of course, from ACCOC, Lori Duran from Advocates for Responsible Treatment, and Townsend Public Affairs, of course, Venture Strategic as well. So a number of different directions were discussed. Everybody's been talking with legislators about bills that can address this from different points of view. We've got kind of the local control piece, taking over the complaints or the regulation of the homes, being more responsive than the state has been able to be. Over concentration and distancing is still being discussed, and then maybe the biggest piece of it, the regulatory framework for increasing standards for safety and fraud, or there was one other.
Data collection.
Data collection, thank you. I think everybody agrees, though, that the key to success in this is going to be moving away from the previous approach, which has kind of been that NIMBY, that I think everybody in Sacramento has not wanted to touch, and working with legislators outside of Orange County, maybe even outside of Southern California, if we could really get together with representatives from Northern California and beyond, maybe San Diego, et cetera. That would be tremendous, I think, to the success of this effort. I think Townsend's going to give an update after me, but I know that they've reached out to some of the representatives from the areas shown in the audit exhibit, have high concentration, as Warren mentioned. Malibu is a good example of that, and I think there's some initial interest there. I'll let them talk more about that. I know that Lori Duran has probably made the most progress here. She has spent countless hours on this effort and has a package of draft bills, half of which have already been submitted to Legislative Council. Chris Murray and I have also been organizing a meeting with Mayor Amesqua out of Santa Ana, who has tentatively kind of agreed to be the tip of the spear and maybe the face of this to help.
She sounded pretty definitive to me.
Yeah, so that meeting
Yeah.
is happening Thanksgiving week, and Lori will be there as well. Anyway, we definitely need as much support as possible. I think, again, if we can get the support of the league and others to push this forward and get some.
And I see
momentum
Connor
going.
Medina's on too with the Cal Cities.
Oh, perfect. Great. Good, Connor, we'll be calling you.
Oh, Connor is on there.
Yeah.
Well, Connor's.
I'm here.
Yeah, Connor,
Hi.
thank you for following this so closely. We know you.
Oh, of course. No, thank you. I'm sorry about there in person. I have a bad cough. I don't want to get anybody sick.
Okay, that's my update.
Thank you, Lauren. Oh, that's so nice. Okay.
So nice that you're.
It is so nice to have someone look at. Thank you. Speaking of Townsend Public Affairs, I believe Elisa is on the line, and you were going to provide kind of a broader legislative update that Lauren mentioned. So why don't you kind of give that to us from Sacramento's perspective?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for the invitation. Certainly don't want to be redundant, but we'll say, like Councilmember Klein mentioned, we are looking at several different options stemming from the audit findings, ideally trying to get more concentration of efforts with Sacramento and local governments, increasing communications, increasing notifications. If we can work out kind of an extension of standards that the state is utilizing for their enforcement and bestow that upon our local governments who are ready, willing, and able to take that on. That is a direction that we're very interested in moving in. And as Assemblymember Dixon mentioned, certainly interested in looking into how we can deinstitutionalize these settings and really move into alignment with the intent of community-based programming through standards for proximity. So there's lots on the table right now, certainly engaging in very early conversations with legislative staff while their bosses are back home for the interim. But as was mentioned, we utilized that heat map that the audit findings gave us to try to identify some folks outside of Orange County so that we can increase our coalition. We certainly have a lot of input, a lot of buy-in from our local representatives, but to make this not just an Orange County issue, we're gonna have to expand that a bit. So we have seen some early interest in Senator Caballero's office, who represents Fresno County. We've seen some interest from Senator Ashby's office, who represents Sacramento County, and also from Assemblymember Donnelly's office, who represents Marin County. And Marin County was just a shade lighter than Orange County. So they've got probably very similar issues to what we are seeing. Very interested in, again, getting back to the root of, are these patients getting well? How can we best ensure that they are in a proper environment for getting well? So those are conversations that we are still having. I know it was mentioned that Malibu might be a prime example, so certainly happy to engage with Assemblymember Irwin, Senator Allen. These are just early conversations that are happening before we have an opportunity to introduce bills. We have that opportunity December the 2nd when members go up to Sacramento to be sworn in. On that day, they can introduce bills. Otherwise, we wait until January. Just a couple of deadlines to put on your radar. End of January is the deadline for getting language to Legislative Council to be drafted in bill form. And then end of February is our deadline for introducing bills. So we've still got kind of a long runway right now to be in conversations with legislative offices and get those bills placed. Still working through kind of vetting some of these ideas and figuring out what is viable and what are the appropriate pathways. Working very closely with the League of Cities and their council to get these things drafted, again, in a way that we can expand our coalition and also see some positive impacts. So that's the update that I have. I did want to pass it over to, Connor, if he has any additional input on this.
Thanks, Elisa. I'll keep it brief. We are hard at work working on a legislative package like we had this year. And this year we introduced 4 bills sponsored by members from the Orange County delegation, 2 of which did get passed and signed into law. They're the first in nearly a decade that actually expand or increase transparency for the industry. So there's momentum there, especially with Assemblywoman Dixon's audit and the results there. So we're all working to capitalize on that momentum. We had a great meeting with legislative staff from most of our legislators last week, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, just making sure that we're all talking, and then that's a really big priority for us as well with the task force and with all the other partners that are working on this issue, making sure we're all communicating and aware of our messaging as a collective working on this issue. But we had a great meeting with the delegation, talking about some ideas that we have, some ideas their offices have. Still pretty early in that process. We're definitely more to come, but we're interested in sponsoring some bills, and we'll keep this committee or this task force apprised of what's going on. So thank you.
Terrific, thank you. And then I also want to extend an invitation, if any of those staffers or senators or assembly people are interested, let's let them know about this meeting, and they can Zoom in and present ideas and get input. If that's a benefit, we'd love it. And in that, it automatically expands the coalition. To share that as you're going through and speaking with different folks across the state.
And if I could, Councilmember too, I would also remind legislative staffers, if you're online or here, do reach out to all the cities in your district. Just these last couple of weeks, we've been having meetings with all of our cities to talk about legislative solutions for the next session for the assembly member. And I always bring up this organization because this issue is coming up. It is an issue now in almost every one of our cities in AB 72. It's an issue of concern. And some of them remember they've been invited but hadn't participated, and so now will be joining again. So I would just encourage all of legislative staffers to spread the word again to your cities, because undoubtedly they will actually want to participate now.
Terrific, thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay, so with that said, we've had a lot that we're going to report. We're going to have our, I just want to reiterate that we are voluntary post-meeting assignment to each and every one of you is exactly what Kristen said. Let's at the next meeting, which we are going to attempt to get scheduled in 2025, it is still being determined. Are we looking at roughly February, March?
Last week of January or first week of February.
Okay, so right around in there, we're gonna be looking at a date, and just go ahead and bring somebody with you. Whether they're a resident interested in this issue or any of the folks that are gonna be making policy on this or interested in having input in policy. So we're expanding our coalition into new areas of the state. So it will be critical to ensure our success, as we've mentioned multiple times today, to make sure that we've got other people in other parts of the state. San Marin, that's a target. Malibu absolutely should have somebody represented here. Because we want their input, we want that data too that they likely have. So as we conclude the meeting, I just want to encourage you to stick around and chat and afterwards, because we were able to deliver quite a bit of information today. So Anybody have any last thoughts that they feel needs to
Is
be
there
said?
input from San Clemente, they were gonna try to correlate the police data versus,
Oh, yes. Yeah, we're working with, the county to actually do some correlation of data that's actually beyond just San Clemente. It's across the sheriff's department and other, police offices, and we probably do need to get a status update in our next meeting. If not, some sort of, I think probably in our next meeting, we can present some data,
Yeah, thank you.
if they have it.
Yeah.
Have you gotten any updates from the county on that?
No, we have not, but we'll check with Supervisor Foley's office. She's been assisting us with that with the sheriff's department. Nick is out of town until next week.
Oh, okay.
They're working on that with us.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it. Anybody? Yes?
Hello, my name's Steve McNally. I'm a resident of Costa Mesa. I had a couple of quick questions. One is, if you have access to some data mining software, you will be able to create a lot of exhibits out of the California Open Data Portal. That's sort of like all the residents, the different levels of recovery homes. I am somewhat familiar with the area that we're working within here, and it's a little confusing because people are mixing different definitions, different licenses and certifications. So if I wanted to give you $1 million today, how would I do it? Are you setting up an entity that can accept money from the public?
Yes.
Okay. And is there a mission and I heard you say the mission.
Yes.
So is one of the missions to take the California ordinance based off of Costa Mesa's ordinance to have other cities adopt it?
We are looking at all of the best practices for each of the cities and the implications from a legal standpoint. Yes.
Okay. So one thing I do know is that California, Los Angeles, the 4 counties that are in Los Angeles, television, radio market, and newspaper market, are 45% of California. So if you can organize that way, you'll have a block of electeds, some 13 city mayors, and then other cities. But a lot of the chairs, I think now, of the committees in Sacramento are from Northern California. And so I'm always worried when things are legislated or regulated, because sober living could be just housing. And I thought the response in the audit from Department of Healthcare Services was pretty weak. So how are we going to address that? Because when you see them appear at a hearing at the state assembly, Senate hearings, they're very, they get away with a lot. So how do they handle when people die? They're not getting sued, so somebody else is getting sued and paying out of insurance. But they still have to address that. And there's so much going on in the state now. And then I'll just leave you with one last thing, is that only 5% of the people who need substance use disorder services are getting them. And it's not because maybe there's not services available. It's because they don't think they're sick enough for them. And in mental health, for certain of the thought disorders, it's more like a lot of people don't know they have an illness, so they're not getting services. So anything you can do to open up the public participation and get people out of denial that are on these journeys. Not all the journeys are ugly. Like I have someone with schizophrenia, his journey isn't ugly, but many are. And I think you will find a ready group of people to delegate this out to once they have a clear concept of what you're doing. It's not an us versus each other. It's all of us making sure that people get healthy recovery. So thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you. As far as a follow-up to what the audit is, I do believe that Assemblywoman Dixon mentioned that she was going to be requesting a follow-up audit to dig down deeper into some of the other information that would provide some more data. So that's a partial answer to that one comment you made, so thank you for bringing that up. Anybody want to address, respond, et cetera? Okay. All right, well, we can stick around and talk. So thank you, everybody. We like to keep it to that hour so that we respect your time and appreciate everything you're doing. And I do want to say thank you to Lori and Warren for the work that was done, and thank you for your email, and appreciate the info. Okay. And so thank you, carry on. Thank you. Lori, can I say something?
I could ask everybody to come to the front of the room, ACCOC is going to capture, is going to capture.
I appreciate it.
Highlight the activity, share it with others. Happening.
That was nice.
Well, and I'm glad you did it because she's really in a sad way, but it actually verified everybody.
Oh, JLAC letter and JLAC audit, the link to the audit report on the website.